I took the night shift at Spinwell Laundromat because the pay was decent and nobody bothered you between midnight and 6 in the morning. Or at least that's what Marcus told me when he handed over the keys on my first night, his eyes lingering on mine for a second, too long before he muttered something about keeping the back door locked, and left without another word. The place was a relic from the 70s, all yellowed linoleum and flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like trapped insects. Rows of white washers and dryers lining the walls like silent sentinels, their circular windows reflecting the harsh light in warped, convex distortions that made the empty room feel both too large and suffocatingly small. Most nights I'd sit behind the counter with my phone and a thermos of coffee, watching the occasional drunk or insomniac stumble in with a trash bag of laundry, feeding quarters into the machines before slumping into the orange plastic chairs bolted to the floor, their eyes glazed and distant as they waited for their cycles to finish. The first time I heard it, I thought I'd imagined it a low mechanical hum from somewhere in the back, barely audible over the ambient drone of the ventilation system, but distinct enough that I looked up from my phone and listened, my pulse quickening for no reason I could name. It was 2:15 in the morning and the laundromat was empty, the last customer having left nearly an hour earlier, and I'd already done my walkthrough to make sure no one was sleeping in the bathroom or behind the folding tables. But the sound persisted, a rhythmic thrum that seemed to come from the far corner where the older machines sat, the ones Marcus said barely worked anymore and that we were supposed to discourage people from using. I stood up slowly, the metal stool scraping against the floor with a sound that made me wince, and walked toward the back, my sneakers squeaking on the tacky linoleum as the hum grew louder, more distinct, until I could identify it clearly as the sound of a washing machine in the middle of its spin cycle, which was impossible because I'd locked the front door at midnight and I was alone. The machine was number 17, a squat avocado green Maytag with rust blooming around its coin slot and a window so scratched and clouded, with detergent residue that you could barely see inside. But as I approached it, I could see through the murk that there was indeed something tumbling inside. A dark mass of fabric rotating slowly in soapy water that caught the overhead light in strange, oily rainbows. My first thought was that someone had started a load before closing and I'd somehow missed it during my rounds. But that didn't make sense because I'd checked every machine. I was certain of it, and besides, the coin mechanism on number 17 was broken. Marcus had shown me the out-of-order sign we were supposed to tape to it, though I'd noticed the sign itself was missing, probably peeled off by some frustrated customer. I stood there for a long moment, watching the dark clothes churn and listening to the machine's labored grinding, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation even as my skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. And then I reached out and yanked open the door, expecting the safety mechanism to stop the drum immediately. But instead the machine kept spinning for several seconds longer, water sloshing out onto my shoes and soaking my jeans up to the knees before it finally shuddered to a halt. The clothes inside were black, or had been black once, but they were so worn and faded that they looked almost gray in the dim light, and as I pulled them out heavy and dripping, cold in a way that seemed wrong, as if they'd been sitting in ice water rather than the barely warm wash cycle, I realized they were old-fashioned, the kind of formal wear you'd see in photographs from the 1940s or 50s. A man's suit jacket and trousers with wide legs, and a woman's dress with a high collar and pearl buttons, all of them smelling not of detergent, but of something organic and unpleasant, like wet earth or the stagnant water at the bottom of a forgotten well. I dropped them back into the drum, my hands shaking slightly as I wiped them on my jeans, and that's when I noticed the quarter in the coin return slot, sitting there as if someone had just used the machine and gotten their money back, even though the coin mechanism was supposed to be broken, and the machine shouldn't have run at all. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the machine had some kind of electrical fault that made it run on its own. Maybe someone had broken in earlier and I hadn't noticed. Maybe I was just tired and paranoid from too many nights alone in this fluorescent purgatory. But as I walked back to the counter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. that the laundromat itself felt different now. The shadows in the corners darker and deeper, the reflections in the machine windows watching me with patient, knowing eyes. I locked the back door, checked it twice, then returned to my stool and tried to focus on my phone, scrolling through social media without really seeing anything, my ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. And for the rest of that shift, I kept glancing up at machine 17, half expecting to see it running again. But it sat silent and dark, its clouded window reflecting nothing but the empty room. The next night I came in early and checked every machine myself before Marcus left, making sure they were all empty and locked, and I even tested number 17's coin slot to confirm it was broken, which it was. The mechanism just clicked uselessly when I pushed quarters in, and nothing happened when I tried to start the cycle. Marcus watched me with an expression somewhere between amusement and concern, and when I asked him if anything weird had ever happened on the night shift, he went very still for a moment before shaking his head and telling me that every laundromat had its quirks, that old machines did strange things sometimes, and that I shouldn't worry about it. But there was something in his voice that suggested he was lying, or at least not telling me everything. And after he left, I sat behind the counter feeling a cold knot of dread settling in my stomach. The first few hours passed without incident, a handful of customers coming and going, and I was starting to relax when I heard it again at exactly 2:15, the same low mechanical hum from the back corner. And this time I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the counter and walked straight to machine 17, which was running again, the drums spinning lazily, water sloshing against the glass, and inside I could see the same dark clothes tumbling in the same hypnotic rotation. I yanked the door open before the cycle could finish, letting water pour out onto the floor, and pulled the clothes out in a soaking heap. And as I did, I noticed details I'd missed the night before. The suit jacket had what looked like old bloodstains on the lapel, brown and faded but unmistakable, and the woman's dress had a long tear down the back, the fabric shredded as if it had been ripped violently. And when I held them under the light, I saw that the pockets of the jacket contained something. A small bundle wrapped in a water-stained handkerchief that fell apart when I touched it, revealing a tarnished wedding ring and a folded piece of paper that had been laminated, protecting it from the water. The paper was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle despite the lamination, dated October 1952, and the headline read "Local Couple Missing After Late-Night Dispute," accompanied by a grainy photograph of a man and woman standing stiffly beside a car, their expressions solemn and formal in that way people had in old photographs, as if smiling would somehow diminish the seriousness of the occasion. The article was brief, stating only that Harold and Evelyn Marsh had been reported missing by neighbors who heard shouting coming from their apartment above the laundromat they operated on Cordell Street, that their car was found abandoned near the river 3 days later, and that police suspected foul play but had no leads and no bodies. I stood there in the puddle of soapy water, holding this piece of someone's tragedy, and felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized that the laundromat I was standing in had been here since the 50s, that this building had probably been the Marshes' business, that I was quite possibly standing in the same spot where something terrible had happened 70 years ago. I put the ring and the clipping back in the jacket pocket and shoved everything into a garbage bag, tying it closed and taking it out to the dumpster in the alley. And when I came back inside, I scrubbed my hands raw in the utility sink, trying to wash away the feeling of those cold, ancient clothes and the smell of wet earth that seemed to cling to my skin. The rest of the shift I kept the lights in the back turned off, telling myself that if I couldn't see machine 17, then maybe it wouldn't start again, which was magical thinking of the stupidest kind. But I was beyond logic by then, operating on pure instinct and the desperate hope that ignoring the problem would make it go away. At 6 o'clock, Marcus arrived looking even more haggard than usual, and when I told him what had happened, leaving out the part about the newspaper clipping, because I wasn't sure I wanted to know if he'd already known the story, he just sighed and said that he'd call a repairman to look at the machine, that it probably just needed to be decommissioned, And I nodded and left without mentioning that decommissioning a machine wouldn't stop whatever was happening in this place. I almost didn't come back for my next shift. Spent the whole day considering whether the money was worth the creeping dread that had taken up residence in my chest. But in the end, I needed the job, and I told myself that maybe the third night would be different. That maybe whatever had been using that machine had finished whatever it needed to do and would leave me alone. I was wrong, of course, and I think part of me knew that even as I unlocked the door at midnight and turned on the lights and went through the motions of setting up for the shift, checking the machines and sweeping the floor, and refilling the detergent vending machine, all the while avoiding looking directly at number 17, which sat in its corner like a patient predator waiting for the right moment to strike. At 2:15, the hum started again, but this time it was different. Multiple machines running at once, a whole chorus of them. And when I finally forced myself to look, I saw that 5 machines in the back row were all going, their drums spinning in perfect synchronization, and through their scratched windows I could see clothes tumbling. But not just the black formal wear this time. There were other things too. Children's pajamas and work shirts and floral dresses, all of them old and worn and wrong. And I understood with a sudden, terrible clarity that these weren't just Harold and Evelyn's clothes, that this laundromat had been the site of multiple tragedies over the decades, that it had collected the residue of violence and loss like sediment at the bottom of a river, and that now, for reasons I couldn't begin to understand, it was all coming back, cycling through these machines as if the building itself was trying to wash away stains that could never be removed. I walked toward the machines slowly, my legs moving almost against my will, and as I got closer, I could see that there was something in the water with the clothes. Dark shapes that didn't quite resolve into anything recognizable, but that moved with an organic fluidity that made my stomach turn. And then one of the machines clicked off and the door swung open on its own, spilling water across the floor, and I saw a hand reach out from inside the drum, pale and waterlogged. Fingers stretched toward me in what could have been a plea or an accusation. I ran then, didn't stop to lock the door or grab my things, just ran out into the parking lot and kept running until I reached my car. And I sat there with the doors locked and the engine running for 20 minutes before I could breathe normally again, watching the laundromat's windows glowing in the darkness like the eyes of some vast patient creature. I called Marcus from the parking lot and told him I quit, that I didn't care about the money or the notice period, that I was never going back into that building, and after a long silence he said he understood, that he was sorry, that he'd hoped it wouldn't happen to me, but that it happened to everyone eventually. Everyone who worked the night shift long enough saw them, the ones who never left, the ones still trying to wash away what had been done to them in that place. He told me that the building had been condemned twice over the years, once in the 70s and again in the 90s, but each time it had been bought and reopened, because laundromats were good businesses, and the rent was cheap, and people had a way of forgetting the past when money was involved, and that he'd worked there for 15 years, and had learned to coexist with whatever haunted those machines, had learned to stay behind the counter and never look too closely when the machines ran by themselves, had learned to throw away the clothes that appeared without asking whose they'd been or how they'd gotten there. I asked him why he hadn't warned me, why he'd let me walk into this without preparation, and he said that people never believed the warnings, that they had to experience it themselves before they understood, and that most people quit after the first incident anyway, so there was no point in scaring them beforehand and making them quit before they'd even started. I told him he was a coward and hung up, and I drove home as the sun was rising. And I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw those machines spinning, saw those hands reaching out from the drums, saw the faces pressed against the clouded glass windows, mouths open in silent screams that no amount of soap and water could ever clean away. That was 3 months ago, and I still can't walk past a laundromat without feeling my chest tighten, without hearing that low mechanical hum in my memory and wondering who else is in there. Who else is still cycling through their final moments, trapped in an endless loop of washing and spinning and never getting clean? I looked up the history of the building afterward, Spent hours in the library going through old newspaper archives, and I found at least 7 incidents associated with that address over the decades. Harold and Evelyn Marsh in 1952, a teenage girl who disappeared from her shift in 1967, a homeless man found dead in the back room in 1981, a domestic dispute that ended in murder in 1994, and several others with less documentation, but enough hints and suggestions to paint a picture of a place that a tragedy the way some buildings attract lightning, as if there was something in the foundation itself that drew out the worst in people, that turned everyday tensions into violence, that kept the victims tethered long after their bodies had been buried or burned or dropped into the river. I drive past the laundromat sometimes, can't help myself, and it's always open, always lit, always has a few cars in the parking lot, people going about their mundane task of cleaning their clothes, completely unaware that they're standing on top of decades of accumulated horror, that the machines around them are running on more than just electricity and water, that at 2:15 in the morning, when the living are asleep or pretending to be, the dead come back to finish the loads they started all those years ago, cycling through their trauma again and again, looking for someone to witness them, to acknowledge that they were there, that something terrible happened to them, that they deserve to be remembered for more than just stains that won't come out no matter how many times you run the cycle. And I wonder about the current night shift worker, whoever they are, whether they've seen what I saw yet, whether they're sitting behind that counter right now, checking their phone and trying to ignore the sound of machines, starting themselves in the back, whether they'll run like I did, or whether they'll stay and become like Marcus, learning to coexist with the horror, learning to throw away the evidence and pretend that everything is normal, that this is just a job like any other, that the hands reaching from the machines are just tricks of the light and tired eyes. But I know better now, know that some places hold on to their dead, know that some tragedies are too profound to simply fade away. Know that the Spinwell Laundromat on Cordell Street will continue to operate as it always has, 24 hours a day, serving the living during the day and the dead during the night, cycling through its accumulated anguish until the building finally collapses or burns down or the earth swallows it whole. And even then I suspect the machines would keep running, keep spinning, keep trying to wash away stains that have soaked too deep to ever be removed. Because some things can never be made clean again. No matter how many cycles you run, or how much detergent you use, or how desperately you want to, believe that the past can be scrubbed away and forgotten.